This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. China and Russia hail stronger strategic ties in Beijing, signing dozens of deals on trade and tech, but still no breakthrough on a new major gas pipeline. China says that reunification with Taiwan is inevitable, hitting back at a key speech by the island's leader, calling it hostile, false, and pro-independence. Now, Samsung resumes pay talks with the Labour Minister mediating as negotiations remain deadlocked, and its workers' union prepares to proceed with a massive strike tomorrow. And South Korea's military begins the formal process of acquiring nuclear-powered submarines, even as talks with the US over Seoul's push for the project stall. Also tonight, traditional fireworks and cultural performances mark the end of Japanese leader CNA Takaichi's visit to South Korean President Lee Jae-myung's hometown, Andong. Plus, a sporting encounter between North and South Korea. Naegahyung Women's Football Club is set to face Suwon FC women in the semi-finals of the Asian Football Confederation Women's Champions League, while they are the first group of athletes from the North to compete in the South in 8 years. China and Russia putting their no-limit partnership on full display in Beijing. Presidents Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin hailing progress in ties as they sign a series of cooperation documents across key areas, including energy and economic cooperation. Mr. Xi welcomed Mr. Putin at the Great Hall of the People with full ceremonial honors, an honor guard, gun salute, and flag-waving children. It marks the Russian leader's 25th visit to China. The two presidents are expected to end the day with a private tea meeting after formal talks and a state banquet. Now, the leaders covered a wide agenda in their discussions, from major energy projects to the escalating situation in the Middle East. They also reaffirmed their commitment to deepening strategic coordination and strengthening long-term partnership. Now, at least 20 cooperation documents were signed, including a major energy deal alongside a joint push to promote more multipolar global order.
坚持相互尊重、平等相待、重信守义、合作共赢，为维护国际公平、公道，推动构建新型国际关系作出重要贡献，成为世界百年变局的关键衡量。
Отмечу, что Россия и Китай активно сотрудничают в области энергетики. Наша страна является одним из крупнейших экспортеров КНР нефти, природного газа, включая сжиженный, и угля. Мы, конечно, готовы и далее надежно обеспечивать бесперебойные поставки всех этих видов топлива на быстрорастущий китайский рынок.
For more, we've got CNA senior correspondent Han Yuguan joining us live from Shanghai and Dasha Chernyshova reporting for CNA from Moscow. Well, to you first, Yuguan. First up, tell us just how important are those energy deals China signed with Russia today?
They are important, but the precise point is this is not yet a full breakthrough. The big item to watch is Power of Siberia 2. That is the proposed gas pipeline that would send Russian gas from Siberia to China through Mongolia. Now, the Kremlin now says China and Russia have reached a general understanding on the project that includes agreement on the route and the way the pipeline will be built. But there are still major caveats. Pricing has not been finalized, other key details are still unresolved, and there's no clear timetable for implementation. Now, according to a Reuters report, there was no mention of oil and gas deals among the signed document published by Kremlin. So I would call this progress, not completion. Still, it matters because this pipeline will be huge. It is expected to carry about 50 billion cubic meters of gas a year to China. For Russia, that is very significant because Moscow has lost much of the European gas market since the Ukraine war. It badly needs China as a long-term buyer. But China has leverage. Beijing does not have to rush. It can push for favorable terms and pricing because Russia needs this deal more urgently than China does. And today's wider context matters too. Xi Jinping spoke about the Middle East and said instability there affects energy supply, supply chains, and international trade. For China, this is not abstract. China is the world's largest energy importer. It wants secure, diversified supply routes. So the Russian pipeline becomes more attractive. Overall, overland routes become more attractive alternative. Now, Arctic shipping and logistics also become more important. But the key line is this: power of Siberia 2 has moved forward politically, but it is not yet commercially locked in yet. Oteli?
Now, Dasha, let's bring you into the conversation. We're hearing a lot about China's unyielding ties with Mr. Putin. Just how crucial is that?
Well, obviously, it is a very important partnership that Moscow is projecting to the world. This alignment with Beijing for Moscow is crucial. The Russian president reaffirming that this friendship goes beyond just personal contact. It is now about the institutionalization of the economies of these two countries that are working together. And that's the projection that Russian president needs both domestically but also internationally. So for the Russian president, that was a very important trip, once again reaffirming this close alignment. President Putin, while in Beijing, saying that the relations between China and Russia are an example of how ties between the two countries should actually be built in modern-day world. He was also referring to the idea that these two countries work together on the global stage to stabilize the international relations, and this is where we refer to the UN Security Council. These both countries having a seat there, and obviously Russia once again reaffirming that the cooperation between Moscow and Beijing is not targeted against other countries. So indeed a very important trip, both economically and politically for the Russian president.
And Yuguan, China rolling out the carpet for Trump just last week. So how does China's reception of Mr. Putin then compare to that of Mr. Trump?
Well, in some ways, it's almost Groundhog Day, but there is some contrast. Mr. Trump's visit is also high profile, of course. Beijing used it to signal that China wants stability with the United States. The message was China and the US may be rivals, but they still need to manage the relationship. With Mr. Putin, the tone is very different. It's not about managing rivalry, it's about displaying trust. Now, Mr. Putin was given the full state visit treatment, a welcome ceremony at the Great Hall of the People, national anthems, PLA honor guard, a 21-gun salute from Tiananmen Square, and Xi and Putin both held small-scale and large-scale talks. They jointly met reporters, and more importantly, and this wasn't in the Trump visit, was they witnessed a signing of 20 cooperation documents. They also agreed to extend the Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation, which has been the legal foundation of China-Russia relations for 25 years. The personal language was pretty much warmer too. Putin called Xi his dear friend and even used a Chinese expression that a day apart feels like 3 autumns. This is, after all, his 25th visit. Now, that is the deliberate theater. It tells audiences in both countries that this relationship is built not just on shared interests, but also on personal rapport at the top. Now, the sequencing matters as well. Now, Xi hosted Trump and then days later hosted Putin. Beijing is not officially saying that these visits are linked, but the optics is pretty obvious. Well, with Trump, China wants to show it can stabilize ties with Washington. With Putin, China wants to show that its strategic partnership with Moscow remains steady, long-term, and unaffected by Western pressure. So the comparison is this. Trump's visit was more about stabilizing a difficult relationship. Putin's visit is about reaffirming a trusted one. And Beijing wants both. Images to be seen together. It wants to show that China is now a central diplomatic player, a capital that both Washington and Moscow have to engage.
So, Dasha, optics aside, has Mr. Putin achieved what he set out to do with this trip to China?
Well, if we look at the wider geopolitical picture, then yes, obviously the signing of the documents as well as the declaration on the establishment of the multipolar world order is something that Moscow is trying to portray to the rest of the world. And China being part of that is very important for the Russian president, underlining the strength that Russia plays, especially if we look at the triangle of Russia, the United States and China. But if we talk about the economics, it is very difficult at this stage to understand how far the details have been worked out on the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline. This is the project that Moscow has been pushing forward for years. But as we understand, the details of this project are yet to be finalized. And the Kremlin has confirmed that indeed that was discussed. However, according to Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, there is only the general parameters that are now being agreed upon for these projects. So a lot more will have to be done on this direction. But obviously, we understand that the Russian president is happy with the outcomes of these visits. There have been more documents signed, but also we understand that the sides have been introducing the wider cooperation between the peoples of these two countries, something that is absolutely paramount to make sure that this goes for the decades to come. They have opened the cross countries educational year for 2027, saying that educating people is something where this cooperation will be moving forward, because that will be bringing new generations that will know the cultures of one another.
Well, thanks for helping us unpack China-Russia ties. Dasha Chinashova for CNA from Moscow, as well as CNA's senior correspondent Tanya Guan in Shanghai. Now, diplomatic language can sound polished, ambiguous, and sometimes a little bit boring. But when leaders describe a relationship as no limits or call it future-oriented, those words are never accidental. So let's decode the labels behind some of the world's most important relationships. First, China and Russia. Well, they call their ties a no-limits partnership. Officially, Beijing calls it a comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination for a new era. Well, in plain English, that means broad cooperation on energy, diplomacy, security, and pushing back against Western pressure. But this is not a formal military alliance. China gets discounted Russian energy and a partner against Washington, while Russia gets an economic lifeline. So the key word is coordination. Close, useful, but still flexible. Next, the world's most important rivalry, the US and China. Well, the phrase here is a constructive relationship of strategic stability. That does not mean friendship. It means both sides know the rivalry is dangerous if unmanaged, and they are competing over technology, trade, tariffs, military power, and with deep sensitivities over Taiwan. But a total breakdown would shake the global economy. So this language tells the world we are rivals, but we are still talking. Then Singapore and China. Well, their upgraded relationship is called an all-round, high-quality, future-oriented partnership. It is a pretty long phrase with a simple message: deeper cooperation in trade, finance, aviation, green growth, and the digital economy. Finally, South Korea and Japan. Their key phrase is future-oriented. So that matters because these are two neighbors with a painful history. Japan's colonial rule, forced labor, and the comfort women issues still run deep. But today's pressures are pulling them closer. North Korea's missiles, China's rise, supply chain risks, and Washington's push for tighter three-way cooperation. So future-oriented means history has not disappeared, but security now comes first. Beijing has called its reunification with Taiwan inevitable. China's Taiwan Affairs Office added that it understands Washington follows its position of not recognizing or accepting the island's move towards independence. The Chinese spokesperson also criticizing Taiwanese President William Lai's speech, marking his second year in the position. It has described his remarks as being filled with lies and hostility after the island leader accused Beijing of undermining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. The spokesperson called his calls for dialogue hypocritical, given his ongoing advancement of separatism. Now, Mr. Lai has said that maintaining stability across the strait is a key goal, but rejects measures that, quote, package unification with peace. He adds that he would tell U.S. President Donald Trump that boosting the island's defense capabilities is essential for peace and that arms purchases from America are necessary. Now, Mr. Lai also said that he would restate his claim that China is undermining stability in the Taiwan Strait. But the Taiwanese leader's remarks came days after Mr. Trump suggested that arms sales to the island could be used as a bargaining chip with China. The U.S. leader's comments were made in response to questions about pending $14 billion weapons sales and alluded to a possible call with the person running the island. China has said that it firmly opposes such deals with Taiwan. Beijing claims that the island is part of its territory and has never renounced the use of force to bring Taiwan under its control. Our time now for a short break. But coming up on East Asia tonight, Hong Kong in the final stages of setting up a new gold clearing system as it aims to become major global hub for bullion trading. Japan's inbound tourism taking a hit in April despite the weakening yen. We'll look at what's driving this trend. Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight. Well, it is now time to get you up to speed in business with none other than Olivia Marzuki, who has been following the Samsung labor strike story very closely. And it sounds like it's moving from a pay dispute to a test of its chip resilience.
Of course, Oteli. So with memory chips already being very tight, the stakes now stretch well beyond the company. And the world's largest maker of memory chips, Samsung Electronics, resumed talks today over pay negotiations mediated by South Korea's labor minister. That's as the standoff between union workers and the company remains at a stalemate, and a strike is set to start tomorrow. The union said the 18-day work stoppage would go ahead as planned, but that they will also continue to make efforts to reach a deal. Bonus payments remain as a sticking point. Samsung Electronics described the union's demand as, quote, unacceptable, citing requests over bonuses for loss-making divisions. Samsung shares fell more than 4% during intraday trading today before closing with a small gain, a modest gain, about 0.2%.
From the factory floor to the global chip race, this dispute is landing at a difficult moment for Samsung. In fact, it's trying to meet surging chip demand just as tens of thousands of workers are threatening to walk off the job. And let's get to the bottom of this. So, Olivia, I have to ask you, if this stoppage goes ahead, are we looking at a serious global supply chain problem?
Not immediately, Oteli. Well, at least not in the sense that it's going to be a full shutdown, because as we know, Samsung factories are highly automated. So most of the workers, they're expected to keep working at key facilities. Doesn't mean there's no risk. We know that Samsung is the world's largest producer of memory chips, and these chips go in everything: our phone, our iPad, our laptop, servers, and also AI data centers. So the real thing to watch here is actually whether the strike would actually start affecting global chip outputs. Some analysts estimate that the strike could affect about 3 to 4% of global supply of DRAM, that is the chip that powers and runs the device, and around 2 to 3% of NAND flash memory. This is the chip that stores the data. Those numbers may sound quite insignificant. It's not so dramatic, but we know that chip supply chains run on a very tight margins. So any small disruption can delay shipments, it can push prices higher, and this would add to the headache for tech companies already scrambling to find and to secure enough chips.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure the government itself is feeling the headache because they are stepping in to help, apparently. South Korea is reportedly weighing an emergency arbitration order. I mean, what exactly is that and what does it do?
It's actually quite serious. An emergency arbitration order would mean that the government can put the strike on hold for 30 days. That's a month. During that period, both parties, the company and the workers' union, would have to continue talks under mediation by the National Labor Relations Commissions. And the government can use this measure when it believes that this could lead into something significant and it would cause damage to national economy. That is the key word, national economy. Now, this emergency arbitration order is quite rare. The measure has only been used 4 times in the modern South Korean history, the last one being 2005 during the South Korean air pilots' strike. It's been 20 years ago. For now, officials are saying that the talk of emergency arbitration is quite premature. They still want to continue dialogue. But President Xi Jinping has stressed and also warned that there is a role for government to play and to step in when any side crosses the line and it harms the wider community. So definitely the door is open there.
And just elaborate a little bit more, because this is not just a Samsung problem, right? I mean, it is also a wider Korea story here that we're looking at.
Exactly. That's why policymakers are watching this very closely, because Samsung is massively important to the Korean economy, accounting for about a quarter of the country's total exports. So a major disruption is not just a company problem, it is a national problem. The Bank of Korea has reportedly warned that a prolonged strike could cut this year's GDP for South Korea by 0.5 percentage point. That is a sizable hit, because South Korea's economy had been forecast to grow by only 2% this year. So a 0.5 percentage point cut is sizable. It could be meaningful. Officials also warned that the major disruption in Samsung could cost the company up to $1 trillion a day. That's about $650 million per day.
Yeah, lots of zeros at the back. So if the strike drags on, in a nutshell, this damage would go well beyond Samsung.
Definitely. It could also test South Korea's position in the global semiconductor race at a time when major economy wants to get a stronger foothold in chips. Staying in South Korea, the bond market rout easing a little there. The nation's vice finance minister says the authorities are watching the domestic bond and currency markets and will take stabilizing measures if needed. He also said that the amount of Treasury bond issuance planned for next month will be cut. And that's as the country's benchmark 10-year Treasury bond yield was down marginally. Earlier this week, it hits the highest level since November 2023 at 4.305%. A similar trend observed in Japan with long-term Japanese government bond and that yields falling from multi-decade and record highs, and that is with lower demand at an auction. The yield on the 40-year JGB and 20-year bonds slid, while the 2-year yield, the most sensitive to BOJ policy rates, close to 1.45%, a level not seen since May 1995. Japan's fiscal outlook is adding pressure as the government plans extra supplementary spending given the fallout from the Middle East conflict. Meanwhile, there is a growing appetite for Chinese government bonds, with the yields of the 10-year note falling yesterday to its lowest since August. Analysts say that demand comes as the country's central bank commits to ensuring adequate liquidity, as well as China's inflation rates compared to other economies. Hong Kong is set to launch a new gold clearing system by July as the city steps up its efforts to become a major global hub for bullion trading. Officials say that the preparations are now in the final stage, with trial operations expected to begin later this year. The government-backed platform will operate in a similar way the world's largest market in London, according to Bloomberg. It is allowing traders to settle deals through so-called unallocated accounts. This is where investors do not own specific bars, but are entitled to an amount of the precious metal, rather like a bank currency account. The system lets investors trade gold more quickly and efficiently, helping to boost liquidity and large-scale trading activity. Hong Kong is also courting several China-friendly central banks to join the platform while expanding its gold storage capacity to 2,000 tons within the next 3 years. The city has already signed a cooperation agreement with the Shanghai Gold Exchange, strengthening ties with mainland China's bullion market. Japan's tourism boom hit a speed bump in April. The decline was linked to an earlier Easter holiday period and rising airfares caused by conflict in the Middle East. Still, April marked Japan's highest monthly visitor total so far this year, supporting the government's long-term tourism goals. New data from Japan's National Tourism Organization shows inbound arrivals fell 5.5% from a year ago to 3.7 million visitors. Tourism growth from South Korea and Taiwan helped offset a sharp drop in visitors from China. Chinese arrivals plunged 57% from a year earlier as tensions continue following remarks by Prime Minister CNA Takaichi on Taiwan last year. Meanwhile, airlines worldwide are raising ticket prices and cutting routes as the war in Iran disrupts the aviation industry. Visitors from the Middle East to Japan fell 21% in April due to flight cancellations. Japan is aiming to attract 60 million annual visitors and generate 15 trillion yen, around $94 billion in tourism revenue by 2030. That's all I have in business for now. Otelli, back to you.
Thanks very much for that, Olivia. Well, we're going to go for another break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, Seoul criticizes Israel over the detention of a South Korean national in international waters. Plus, dozens of people missing in central and southwest China after continuous rainstorms inundate cities. This is East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Chinese and Russian Presidents Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin signing dozens of cooperation documents after their summit in Beijing, both leaders hailing unyielding ties that have reached an unprecedented level. China says their reunification with Taiwan is inevitable, hitting back at a key speech by the island's leader, calling it hostile, false, and pro-independence. Samsung resumes pay talks with the Labour Minister mediating as negotiations remain deadlocked, and its workers' union prepares to proceed with a massive strike tomorrow. A document by the South Korean Navy has revealed that the military has initiated a formal process to acquire nuclear-powered submarines. Seoul has been pushing for the project despite little progress in security talks with the U.S. The document basically outlines the need for the program. It also specifies requirements, including desired capabilities, the number of systems needed, and projected deployment schedules. The Joint Chiefs of Staff is reviewing the Navy's proposal and will likely hold a meeting later this month to finalize the project's requirements. The document also commits Washington to supporting Seoul's bid for the right to enrich uranium and reprocess spent fuel. Meanwhile, South Korea's military is reportedly reviewing plans to build at least 4 5,000-ton nuclear-powered submarines after the mid-2030s. But questions remain over how South Korea would source nuclear fuel for the vessel's small reactors. Seoul would need a special agreement with Washington to secure U.S. approval for the transfer of nuclear material for military use. The government is also expected to unveil a roadmap for the submarine program soon, outlining its defensive role, non-proliferation commitments, and development timeline. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung has criticized Israel for arresting its nationals in international waters. Israel forces had intercepted humanitarian aid flotilla headed for the Gaza Strip, which was carrying 2 activists linked to a South Korean civic group. Mr. Lee called Israel's detention of its nationals as way out of line, saying that the activists were arrested for reasons not valid under international law. He also questioned if such actions should be allowed to pass without protest. The South Korean leader added that Seoul will make its own judgment on whether to arrest Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu under the International Criminal Court. Earlier this month, Israeli forces intercepted another aid flotilla. The 2 boats had departed separately from Italy and Greece, despite a government travel ban on Gaza. South Korea's foreign ministry says that it has repeatedly urged Israel to ensure the safety of its nationals and facilitate their swift release and deportation if vessels are seized. Rescue efforts are underway in central and southwest China amid continuous rainstorms since the weekend. At least 25 people have died and some 20 others reported missing, including in the provinces of Hunan, Guizhou, and Hubei. Reports say nearly 24,000 people have been forced to evacuate. Schools and businesses have shut as flooding disrupts transport and power supplies. Since Tuesday, more than $17 million in disaster relief funds have been allocated for affected regions, and an additional $7.3 million fund has been given to support urgent recovery efforts in Hunan province. Government officials say that another $4.4 million will be earmarked for Guizhou province, citing significant casualties and property losses. China's Met agency says the unusually broad downpour is forecast to last through Thursday. Rainfall for today is expected to be the heaviest along the lower parts of the Yangtze River, and they have cautioned people to watch out for rain-related risks, including landslides and waterlogging. Scientists have been warning that extreme weather events will become more intense and frequent across the board due to global warming. Several members of Indonesia's cabinet have met with the Chinese ambassador and Chinese mining firms in the country after a business group complained about tougher foreign investment rules in the country. Indonesia's energy, finance and investment ministers said that they have spoken with Chinese-led investors who say that tougher policies are making it more difficult for them to do business. The China Chamber of Commerce in Indonesia, or CCCI, said that new policies have raised costs, particularly in mining mineral resources. Well, the complaint was made in an undated letter to Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto. Over the years, Indonesia has tightened its hold on the mineral sector by introducing stricter policies, including a ban on raw nickel ore exports in 2020. Now, Energy Minister Bahlil Lahadalia said that they are in dialogue with the concerned business. He added that the Indonesian government wants foreign investors to benefit from doing business in the country. And China is one of Indonesia's biggest foreign investors. The CCCI maintained that it has always supported the country's economic growth and complied with Indonesia's investment-related laws. Meanwhile, the Indonesian business community has urged the government to treat the letter constructively instead of as a complaint. OpenAI is committing more than 300 million Singapore dollars to boost the city-state's artificial intelligence ecosystem. The ChatGPT creator says that this includes establishing its first applied AI lab outside the US. The tech firm will also expand its technical team in Singapore by more than 200 people over the next few years. And that move will include efforts to train mid-career engineers and provide technical AI-driven support for startups. It is one of several agreements signed to strengthen Singapore's position as an AI hub. Others include a new national AI partnership with Google. And this will focus on areas like healthcare, life sciences, and education. US chipmaker NVIDIA will also be setting up a new research center here, focusing on embodied AI. And this includes robots which can operate in the physical world. The firm is also aiming to make computing more efficient. And CNA's Sarah Alcalde spoke with OpenAI's Chief Revenue Officer to find out more about the company's big-ticket investment.
I know you're announcing an MOU with Singapore. The Singapore government includes an applied AI lab, which is the first outside the U.S. So why Singapore?
It's about creating that frontier deployment capability here to support Singapore's national priorities. And it starts with creating the AI applied laboratory. As you mentioned, it's the first of its kind here. We're going to be hiring over 200 technical resources here in Singapore, which means this will be one of the largest areas of the forward deployed engineering capability. And the forward deployed engineer capability is really about bringing the research and the practical deployment of AI together. And we think that's really going to help accelerate deployment here. The second part of it is building out AI talent and skills here. So making sure that the next generation of talent and everyone here can learn the capabilities of AI and deploy that. So whether it's working with students, educators, developers, engineers, through training, workshops, labs, getting access to the products itself so that they can learn and deploy it. And then lastly, it's about making sure that every Singaporean gets access to this capability and can use it in everyday life. And continue to forward the economy through this partnership. So we're really excited about it. Singapore is such a vibrant area for us. We see really advancements in AI and leaning in. The startup community is so vibrant. We see many large companies deploying AI already. It's actually an area where our products are rapidly adopted, both ChatGPT and Codex.
You're committing 300 million.
300 million, yes. This will be an investment in 300 million, yes.
And 200 jobs is what you mentioned. So yes. How will that money be allocated, and what type of talent and the workforce that you're looking for here in Singapore?
It's both a combination of bringing the model capability and the critical workflow. So having the ability to have that technical skill set to sit side by side with customers and really unlock economic value and transformation here in Singapore. And we think that will be such a great way to help Singapore lead the way in this new chapter.
Southeast Asia will need more energy to power its AI future, and many see the ASEAN power grid as a major opportunity. So after years of discussion, the pressure is now on to turn that vision into real infrastructure. But that includes cross-border power lines, stronger national grids, and rules that allow renewable electricity to move across the region. Well, CNA's Ilakia Selvaraju spoke to experts about this and more at Ecosperity Week in Singapore.
The big question is no longer whether Southeast Asia needs the ASEAN power grid, but how quickly countries can turn that vision into bankable projects. Scott Morris from the Asian Development Bank says that the opportunity is stronger now because countries are increasingly seeing regional cooperation as central to long-term energy security. But he says political commitment is still key.
There's a reason that this hadn't historically moved from vision to reality. Political commitment is critical, and again, I think in the current moment, we've never seen a better opportunity in terms of these countries understanding that their long-term energy security is a matter of mutual dependence within the region, because the political commitment will drive action on what are some fundamental technical, regulatory, legal barriers that need to be resolved across these countries.
The next test is if that momentum can translate into projects investors are willing to back. But for private capital to come in at scale, Catherine McKenna from Climate and Nature Solutions says the conditions must be clearer, from regulations and legal frameworks to how projects are prepared and structured.
It could be, different governments, different levels of governments, utilities. But the reality is we don't have a choice. We're now in the era of electricity. We need our grids to be working. We need even more power than we needed before when you look at AI and other demands. Plus, we want to electrify everything. So that has to be job one for governments working with the private sector to leverage capital and get the investments needed, because it's actually about powering people's lives, it's powering businesses, and it's the way we are going to be able to get to a sustainable future.
The message is clear. Southeast Asia's climate ambition is real. But that alone will not cut emissions, unlock capital, or build the infrastructure that the region urgently needs. The real test now is execution, turning pledges into projects, policy into certainty, and cooperation into real cross-border systems. And because the clean energy transition will not be measured by targets on paper, but by what gets financed, built, and delivered on the ground. As Ecosperity Week wraps up, the hope is these conversations do not end here, but help drive the harder work ahead in the fight against climate change.
Singapore has raised a total of $800 million to finance green projects in Asia. The second and newest tranche of funding comes from DBS and Cathay United Bank. It's under a 3-year-old initiative called FastP, which aims to support clean energy transition projects in the region. Singapore has set a long-term goal of raising a total of $5 billion and has pledged up to $500 million on its own. About $128 million of the amount raised so far will go to 4 sustainable infrastructure investments in Southeast Asia. Now, Singapore's climate ambassador Ravi Menon will also chair a new international advisory board to oversee the initiative, which pairs public funds with private and philanthropic capital. National Development Minister Chee Hong Tat made the announcement at the Ecosperity Conference, and he says that the new board will include philanthropists and energy transition experts.
The IAB will provide strategic advice and feedback to keep FastP aligned with global and regional energy transition trends. It will also guide the scaling and deployment of FastP funds and inform the development of its next phase. The IAB members include Lord Adair Turner, Chair of the Energy Transitions Commission, Baroness Shriti Vadera, Chair of the World Bank Private Sector Investment Lab, and Mark Gallagher, co-founder of the Three Cans Group.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, how South Korea is receiving the first North Korean team on its soil in 8 years as the two prepare to face off on the football pitch. Japanese Prime Minister CNA Takaichi and South Korean President Lee Jae-myung put their country's growing ties on full display in the South Korean city of Andong this week. Ms. Takaichi attended a traditional riverside fireworks display and cultural performance in Mr. Yi's hometown, Nandong. The evening program included traditional cultural performances such as pansori, a Korean form of narrative singing. The two leaders also attended a banquet featuring Korean and Japanese cuisine in a symbolic display of friendship. Beyond the cultural exchanges, talks ended with an agreement on energy security and supply chain cooperation, following concerns over disruptions linked to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. Both sides discussed securing supplies of crude oil and liquefied natural gas, as well as expanding cooperation on stockpiling and petroleum product swap arrangements. North Korea's Naehyung Women's Football Club are facing off against Suwon FC women this evening in the semi-finals of the AFC Women's Champions League. Well, it is the first North Korean team to compete in the South in 8 years. And CNA senior correspondent Lim Yun-suk has more.
Heavy rain swept through Suwon hours before kickoff, forcing cheering groups to cancel rehearsals outside Suwon Sports Complex Stadium. But that did not stop fans from gathering ahead of one of the most unusual football matches South Korea has hosted in years. Some came ready to support both the South and North Korean teams, a rare sight on South Korean soil.
이게 흔하게 볼 수 있는 계기가 아니다 보니까 시민분들이 더 참여가 더 열정적이고 또 참여율이 더 높은 것 같습니다.
지금 북한이랑 사이가 매우 안 좋은 상황이니까 좀 이런 행사 잘 기획해서 하면 공동 응원단도 하면서 좀 풀어가려고 하지 않았을까요?
Some of the groups cheering for both teams were given funding from Seoul, amounting to 300 million won or $200,000 in total. Cheering guidelines were also discussed with authorities, as the waving of the North Korean flag in public is forbidden under the law. Even before match day on Wednesday, the semi-final was drawing attention far beyond football. More than 7,000 tickets sold out within 12 hours, and media attention was intense, prompting both sides to declare at pre-match media conferences that they will focus firmly on the game itself. The two Koreas are still technically at war, as the Korean War in the 1950s ended with an armistice rather than a peace treaty, and relations have sharply deteriorated in recent years. The brief period of exchanges seen around the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, including joint teams and cross-border sporting events, has long since faded. That is why moments like this stand out. One North Korean club and one South Korean club on the same pitch under the attention of a divided peninsula watching closely. Many of those who came to catch the match believe this is not a scene they will witness again anytime soon. Im Yun-suk, CNA, Suwon, South Korea.
More than 1 million football fans are expected in New York and neighboring New Jersey next month for the FIFA World Cup. But fans will be paying a hefty price to be a part of it all. Mitch McCann files this report for CNA from Manhattan to the MetLife Stadium.
The first price hurdle for overseas football fans is simply getting here. The price of jet fuel is hovering around $4 to $5 a gallon. That's about $1 to $1.30 a litre as tensions in the Middle East weigh on the markets. And that's pushing up the price of airfares. Fans who book late could expect to pay significantly more for air tickets. Most fans are expected to arrive at John F. Kennedy Airport here in New York. But what's it actually going to cost once you get here? Well, let's head into the city and find out. And there's nothing more New York than taking a yellow cab.
Our driver, MK, originally from India, says business right now is slow. He's hoping to cash in on the beautiful game this summer.
Right now, no tourists coming, not too much, but when the World Cup starts, so people will come here, so my work will be busy, and I like this thing.
Okay, so from JFK to the middle of Manhattan, here in Times Square, there is a flat fee of $70, but you also have to pay tolls, a tip, and surcharges. So all up, it cost us $102. Then there's the question of where to stay in the city that never sleeps. New York has hundreds of hotels, from budget options to luxury stays valued at thousands of dollars a night. But oddly enough, hotels aren't seeing a World Cup bump, at least not yet. According to analytics group CoStar, as of late April, only about 18% of hotel rooms were booked for the tournament period between June 13 and July 19. That's down from 26% at the same time last year.
Vijay Nandapani from the Hotel Association of New York City blames the low volume of bookings in part to what's being called the Trump slump, which is when visitors are less inclined to come here because of the president's policies.
I think it's significant. I don't know that I could ascribe a particular ratio, but I'd easily say it's between 15 and 20% because the visas are obviously one part of that. But even otherwise, this sense that you're not welcome in the country is being telegraphed sometimes overtly, sometimes many times subtly.
We've covered the airfare, the cab fare and the hotel rates, but no trip to New York is complete without the food, and that comes at a cost too. A hot dog at a stand like this one, $5. A classic bagel, $5.55. A New York slice, well, this used to cost 99 cents, and now it's gone up to a whole $1.50.
New York is more than food, though. It's a place of finance, fashion and commerce. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere, they say. But it's not easy right now, according to Jessica Walker from the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce.
The conditions in New York City are a level grade C-, and that is because the cost of doing business in New York City has really exploded for a lot of reasons. And it's not just rents. People always think about rent, but it's also the cost of insurance, the cost of utilities, and costs that have come from tariffs and inflation. For small businesses, again, they see this as a huge opportunity to potentially, drive a lot of sales and revenue.
Then there's getting to the matches themselves, one of the most controversial costs of this World Cup. A train from Penn Station in Manhattan to MetLife Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey, usually costs $12.90. But during the World Cup, a round trip could set you back $98. And that price was brought down from $150 and then $105, which had provoked outrage. New Jersey Transit recently said it was going to cost the agency $62 million to transport fans to and from the stadium, and grants only cover a fraction of that. Now, if you've made it this far with me to MetLife Stadium, you know that tickets don't come cheap. Official prices started at around $140 for lower-tiered matches. Premium seats can run past $8,000 for the final, with resale prices climbing even higher. So, how do all of those expenses look? If you were to book flights 5 weeks before the tournament, round-trip economy tickets from Singapore, for example, would cost around $2,800 at hotels, plus match tickets, transport, food and incidentals. That could set you back by more than $10,000. For many fans, the FIFA World Cup is a once-in-a-lifetime experience, a chance to be part of something bigger than the game itself. But it all comes at a price that's far out of reach for most people. For CNA, I'm Mitch McCann in New York.
And that wraps up Wednesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at CNA.Asia. Thanks for watching.